Everyone, and welcome to the second of these special webinars on sustainability on lighting, organised by Ricolite, the UK's leading compliance body for the waste, electrical and electronic equipment regulations. I'm Ray Maloney, I'm the head of content at the Build Back Better Awards, and I'm going to be your host for today. We're starting now, and we hope to finish around 12:30. Now, today we're discussing the return of the lamp, or more specifically, how the replaceable revolution will change lighting. Our panel today includes Peter Hunt, who's the president of Lighting Europe and the chief operating, he was a former president, I should say, of Lighting Europe and the chief operating officer of the Lighting Industry Association. We're pleased to have Dee Dentonier, who's Secretary General of the Zaga Consortium and also Director of Standards at Signify. We have Sophie Parry, who's the Technical Applications Consultant at Zumtobel Lighting, and she's also a member of the Council of the Society of Light and Lighting and the author of many standards on lighting. We also have, representing the manufacturers today, also is Phil Muir, who's Design and Technology Director at Design Plan Lighting. And representing the client and facility side is Jeff Coffin, the Business Development Director of Store Maintenance. And Store Maintenance have clients in major retailers, including The Body Shop, Doc Martens, Louis Vuitton, Ralph Lauren and Mulberry. And finally, we have Nigel Harvey, who's the CEO of Ricolite, will be helping us also answer questions about waste, electronic and electrical equipment. Now, today's webinar will be taking the form of discussion of the implications and the possible impacts of the new rules. We'll try to answer questions, but there's a lot that is going to be decided by market dynamics and what happens out there in the real world. Next slide, please, Suzanne. Now, this is the second of our Ricolite series of webinars for 2021. They're all free to join. You just need to go to ricolite.co.uk and follow the links, and free to register as well. I'll keep you posted of developments. Now, we had one back in March on the circular economy, the legislation coming through, and you can go back and you can replay that and have a look at it, and you can fast forward through it and stop it at bits and all that. So that is on the website for you to go back to. On Thursday, 24th of May, we have how to go net zero. I'm sure all you lighting manufacturers want to go net zero as soon as possible, and this is a lighting manufacturer's guide to how you do that. That's at 11 o'clock, so get that in your diary. And then in the autumn, we have two more webinars: the specifier's role in the circular economy, which is on Thursday, the 16th of September. And we also have designing for end of life, designing luminaires for end of life, which is at the end of October. So get those in your diary, and we'll see you on those. Right, basic housekeeping for today. You all know the drill, really. We're recording this session, and it'll be uploaded and on the site, and you'll be able to see it hopefully in the next day or two. We'll finish around midday today. Now, if you've got questions for the panel, please put them in the Q&A box and not the chat box. So if you could reserve the chat box for any questions you've got for Suzanne, who's the webinar administrator. If you've got questions with sound about anything like that, put them there for Suzanne, that'd be great. Now, I usually start these webinars with some news of sustainability and circular lighting from around the industry, and today's no exception. Firstly, I wanted to name check this, which is that Trilux has developed a prototype of its Pirelli LED luminaire, whose housing is made from cornstarch. Now, specifically, the body and indeed some parts of the diffuser are made from a synthetic polymer called polylactic acid, or PLA, which is in turn made from cornstarch. It's termed a biocompatible thermoplastic. You can use it in a 3D printer, and under industrial combusting conditions, the material decomposes completely in just a few months. So that's an interesting development. Second, I'd like to name check the ZTA range from Stone Lighting. And this has been designed from the ground up with circularity principles in mind. It uses minimal materials, especially aluminium and plastics. Every part of the manufacturing process is done in-house or as locally as possible up there in Scotland, and it's designed to be repaired, upgraded, and eventually recycled. Now, while they give a 5-year warranty on this, the company says that it's got sort of what it terms a duty of care for a further 20 years, which is, I think, is a very interesting proposition. And they've even come up with a travel journal of the product. And here it is, an exploded diagram of it, showing all the parts and where they come from. And you can see the travel miles of all the individual parts and where they come from in the world. And you can also download a really interesting PDF booklet about the ZGA. Next slide, please, Suzanne. Yeah, so this is a great little booklet that explains the thinking behind it. No, I just thought they did it really well. So I commend that. I recommend that too. And if you just go to the Stone Lighting website and follow the links. I'm going to give a shameless plug to the Build Back Better Awards because that's my new role. I'm head of content there. This is a new recognition program which is designed to identify and reward those technological innovations that will create the next age of the built environment post-pandemic. It's starting with a lighting category, of course it is. And what's been super encouraging is that a lot of the entries in the product side have been, products that with high sustainability values and the circular economy principles at heart. So that has been super encouraging to see the sort of innovation that's going on around the industry. Right, on to the matter in hand today, which is replaceability. As you all know, the replaceable market is staging a comeback. The replaceable lamp is coming back thanks to the eco-design regulations, the EU regulations, which have been basically cut and pasted by the UK government into UK statute. And they mandate that those both manufacturers and importers of luminaires and other products that contain lights must ensure that the light sources and the control gear can be changed by the end users or by a qualified person. Now, manufacturers are obligated to provide technical information on how you can do this, how you can change the components, including pictograms. And Lighting Europe has drawn up this set of pictograms, which is expected to be adopted widely. So there you can see these are pictograms that people expect to start appearing on a luminaire near you. So the question is this: will the eco design regulations bring us back to the days of swapping a fluorescent tube, or will it be more like printer ink cartridges, which everybody loves to hate, and where you have an aftermarket for high margin spares, which in turn creates another market for usually Asian made compatible in inverted commas alternatives. And there are fears that the replaceability requirements will create a technical, interoperable and warranty minefield, and that's what we're going to drill into today. As I love doing lists, I came up with 10 key questions that I see that remain unanswered. So first of all, what is the incentive to use plug and play standard connectors? Is the incentive, and who decides basically? Who decides what a commonly available tool is? Is a soldering iron, for instance, a commonly available tool? Who decides what a qualified person is? Is that somebody, an employee of a company? Is it an electrician? Is it somebody else? How do we stop the cost of the call out, the investigation and the replacement from being more than the cost of a new luminaire? That's a key one for me. How do we prevent the creation of a high margin aftermarket for proprietary components? How do we prevent low cost compatible components entering the market? And if a module is replaced with a more efficient unit or a unit that's different in any way, isn't there a need for a requirement for an ENEC test? Equally, couldn't a manufacturer argue that any replacement would affect the product's compliance with electromagnetic compatibility and the radio equipment directives, and the testing recertification is required? When will that be required? So that's a key question. Additionally, who decides what's a technical justification for opting out of the replaceability requirement? Controversially, there's an opt-out that a manufacturer can say, well, we have a strong technical justification for not complying with these rules, and there's lack of clarity around that. And finally, how do we stop luminaires with non-replaceable components from continuing to enter the market through the online marketplace and other routes? And the difficulties and the challenges of policing the market in recent years over WEEE and many other standards will certainly be front of mind. Right, here to help us answer some of those questions, that's your challenge. We're going to go to Devon and we're going to speak to Peter Hunt. Peter, you're going to, if you could just update us with the regs and what you see as the challenges, and is there any answers to these questions?
Thanks, Ray. Good morning, everyone. I'll have some answers, hopefully, to some of those questions, maybe not all of them, but what I'll probably do now is just do a quick summary of what this part of the regulation means. So this is Article 4 of the Energy-Related Products and Energy Labelling Regulation. And frankly, it's the start of things to come. I think this is the first sort of manifestation, if you like, of a circular economy policy embedded in a regulation. So this isn't going to be the end of it by any stretch of the imagination. We all appreciate we can't continue to throw things into landfill, and products need to be more sustainable. They need to last longer. They need to be repairable, replaceable, reusable, and so on. We know this. We all know the story. But here we are with the first bit of regulation that relates to that. And I'll just summarize what it really means. I mean, essentially, manufacturers, and by manufacturers, that also means importers or authorized representatives of containing products, and this is a word we haven't really, or a phrase we haven't seen before, but containing products essentially is a luminaire, but it could also be a fridge, a piece of furniture with some inbuilt lighting or whatever. So I'm going to say luminaire from now on, because that's what we in the lighting business consider to be a luminaire, but just think that it goes a little bit beyond that. So these luminaires, the manufacturers must ensure that any light source and control gear can be replaced with the use of commonly available tools. Now we'll come to that in a moment. But when you replace them, there must be no permanent damage to that luminaire, essentially. So it's a bit like a lamp, like you were saying. You replace a lamp, it's designed for that to happen. That's not a problem. But then the question mark comes in when it comes to these commonly available tools. So there's a get out, as Ray said. If there's a technical justification for not doing that, and that might be, for example, that you've got an in-ground luminaire, it's glued together to make sure that there's no ingress of moisture or particles, and that by taking that luminaire apart, it might compromise that seal, and therefore that might qualify as a technical justification. But if you can't make that technical justification, you have to make the parts replaceable. If it's not possible to make those parts replaceable, you still have to, as a manufacturer, make sure that market surveillance authorities can remove the light source and the control gear for verification purposes, so that they can check the light output and so on. In that case, they can damage the luminaire, but they mustn't damage the components they want to verify. So when they're prizing apart this luminaire to get the LED module out or the control gear, if they wreck the luminaire, no problem, as long as the light source and the control gear are intact and can be checked. Now, all of the information about this, about how to replace, whether it should be from a professional or from a DIY end user, how the luminaire should be taken apart for market surveillance authorities, all of that has to be included in your technical documentation. So there's quite a lot to consider there, and as Ray said, Lighting Europe have produced a very comprehensive guide on this, including some pictograms which can be used on packaging. Again, there's a little bit of a grey area there, because the information on the outside of the packaging only needs to be there where the luminaire is sold directly to an end user. So it may well be for commercial luminaires, for example. As long as they're not being sold to the end user, that'll be fine. So it's already getting confusing. I appreciate that. And on top of all of that, at the end of the life of the product, the manufacturer must also provide information on how that product can be recycled at the end of its life, so how it can be taken apart and those parts recycled. Now, if the product cannot be taken apart by the market surveillance authorities for this verification purpose, it's not classified anymore as a luminaire. It becomes a light source. And from that point, it doesn't have to comply with this Article 4, but it does have to comply with the requirements for a light source. So, for example, if you've got a product where there might be some loss through diffusion, reflection, or whatever, if you can't take it apart without damaging the components, then it's going to be treated as a lamp, and it'll be tested, and the market surveillance authorities will see it as a lamp. So I think that's probably enough of an introduction to this Article 4 part. I mean, it leaves lots of questions open. Ray's already raised quite a number of those. Hopefully we can answer some, if not all. We'll do our best. And back to you, Ray.
Yeah, well, it's quite. I think one question is a quick one: is who decides on these things, Peter? You know, do we know who will say that's a good technical justification for that? That one isn't. You know, that's the question. So,
well, yeah, exactly. It's a tricky one, because I suppose ultimately a court of law will decide whether that's a technical justification. There is no definition of what is a good technical justification. Lighting Europe, in their guide, which is available to LIA members free of charge as a plug for the LIA, in that guide, they give some examples of technical justifications, and actually the one I just gave you, where there's, for example, an in-ground luminaire where it would make sense not to have this thing taken apart, because you can't be confident that it would be electrically safe if it was parts replaced and then it was put back together, because you're not confident as a manufacturer that it's capable of being put back together intact. That would be a technical justification.
Okay, I just asked the rest of the panelists to turn on your video and your mics, etc. And let me bring in the manufacturers first. Sophie, I can come to you. You know, what's your take on the sort of I mean, do you see it as a blunt instrument, these regulations, in terms of it's just all luminaires, it's not categorized?
Yes, bearing in mind that Article 4 is really the start of codifying and legislating for circular economy. It is very high level from a manufacturing perspective. And I think the market will determine going forward the nuances behind this. But, my initial thoughts are that when we talk about luminaires, we really need to think about the whole range of luminaires, because depending on, your background and who you work for or what you work with, you may have a very fixed view on a luminaire as something you work with on a day-to-day basis. So, if you're an electrician doing primarily domestic work, it could be predominantly based on something like an LED GU10 lamp. But I think what we need to do is open up and agree some categories on luminaires within the market. So, my initial thoughts are that if you was to segregate luminaires, you would have things like entry level for domestic, entry level retail commerce, specification grade luminaires, which are quite generic across many applications. Then you move up to architectural grade. Then you've got your outside stuff like street lighting, for instance. And then you go into your more technical luminaires for, say, intrinsically safe applications or flame-proof applications, and life safety, such as emergency lighting, for instance. So you really need to segregate the whole gambit of luminaires and then look at them individually in terms of creating your technical justifications and also your supporting documentation as to how you would enter these luminaires, the do's and don'ts, the tools required. Again, I think it's going to be very difficult to categorize what simple or common tools are. I think, again, it depends on which area you're working, so that you get to the point where you're providing documentation to say, well, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, because it comes under a certain subheading which becomes recognized. Otherwise, I think everybody will just write technical justifications to say you can't do anything. So we need to find that middle ground, and I think we need to open it up, Ray.
I mean, you say we should agree it as an industry, but what mechanism is that? Is that the LIA? Is it the, you know, what body how would we bring that agreement together, shall I say?
I think the lobbying and the ideas should be put together now. The eco-design legislation is reviewed every 5 years. You know, for instance, you know, what's being issued on the 1st of September this year, there's already a list of what, you know, is being considered for 5 years' time for the next version of eco-design. So now's the time to start doing it, to say that, look, we've got this. We need to expand on it a little bit, you know, that there are many different forms of luminaire. And also, it'll be interesting to see from the market, particularly from the creative side of the market, where we're looking at lighting designers and architects. You know, they are used to specifying some very interesting luminaires to complement their architecture. There's also going to be a challenge there as to how we service that market and deliver what's required for some of these more creative buildings in the future as well.
Yeah, where lighting is integrated into the building. But I think Peter hit it on the head with, you know, with in-ground uplights. It's a great example. If we as an industry agree, guys, you know, replaceability doesn't apply to an in-ground uplight, you know, where does that live? You know, where does that agreement, we agree, is that LIA, is it who sort of, you know, and who then, you know, can make those technical justifications? So
I think initially, yeah, I mean, in the absence of any legislation, then, you know, somebody like the LIA could put out best practice guidelines for the industry. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's taking a considered view that works for the majority. I think that is the way to go, but that also provides a vehicle for lobbying for future legislation, say through eco-design or the UK equivalent.
Mm-hmm. Phil, if I could bring you in here, you know, I know you've had replaceability in your luminaires for a long time because of the type of markets that you're in, etc. But what's your take on this? That we agree that somehow there's guidance needs to emerge or consensus needs to emerge on this?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think there needs to be a consensus across the industry because otherwise it's very much open to interpretation. You know, so from our point of view as a manufacturer, you know, we absolutely welcome, you know, this kind of legislation in principle, but putting it into practice, I think, is going to be difficult. So, you know, across the industry, you know, certainly in the UK and across, you know, wider markets, you know, we have to have that consensus, because if you look at a residential product, you look at a highly technical product, an architectural product, you know, they are very, very different. It's, you know, it's very easy, I think, to introduce, you know, a form of standardization in domestic or residential markets. It's been around for years, the lamp base. You know, and, you know, you can legislate for safety. You know, the thing that I guess worries us is, you know, across the markets is how do you ensure, you know, the safety of a product when, you know, we can't decide really who is a professional. You know, if you have keen amateurs playing around with products, we can, you know, we can issue instructions on how to maintain the products. I think we all know as manufacturers that, you know, end users tend not to pay too much attention to them. So, you know, there's got to be inevitably, you know, some kind of standardization, but, you know, what does that look like? You know, does that stifle creativity? I think Sophie already mentioned that. But I think the biggest issue is safety. You know, it's hard enough trying to find, you know, compatible LED boards and drivers as a manufacturer, and we know what we're doing. So, you know, how then can we legislate to make sure that you know, a consumer or an end user can actually make those changes themselves?
Mm-hmm. And what's your take on the sort of, you know, the in-ground uplight question, you know, where we agree on a set of luminaires, a guidance that these luminaires are separate from, you know, in a different category?
Yeah, and I can absolutely understand why that would be the case, and something like an in-ground uplighter, you know, is inherently difficult to maintain. But I think, you know, from our point of view as manufacturers, we've got to design this maintainability into the products from the outset. So it's maintainability, and it's thinking about end of life of the product. So, you know, we've really got to think much further ahead. You know, we're lucky at Design Plan that, you know, we've been doing this for years, so it's not a huge step change. But, you know, it's with maintainability, it's about making it impossible to get it wrong. Okay. So you have to design that into the product from the outset. So, really what we should be aiming for are in-ground uplighters that are maintainable. I know that's a challenge, but as manufacturers, that's what we need to get to.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is this issue of, the sort of policing authorities need to get access to product. I mean, are we really going to see an in-ground uplight design, labeled as a light source? I mean, that's an interesting vista.
And I think this is the other concern, is that because it's open to interpretation and there are technical get-outs, you will find, manufacturers who, do this with the right intentions. But you will always find manufacturers that will try and find a way out, take the easy route. And I think sustainability is something, as manufacturers, we absolutely have to build into our products from the outset. So it's a different way of thinking. As an industry body like the LIA, we've got to absolutely encourage manufacturers to do that and not to try and take the easy route.
Mm-hmm. Dee, if I could bring you in at this point, what's Zyga's take on this, and what's its role in the sort of replaceability market going forward?
Thank you. Yeah, first on the blunt instrument, I think we can also kill the blunt instrument. So although they may be a bit painful at the beginning, they can still be very effective. The Zyga, my personal take also on this is that this creates great awareness of the need in the world to be more durable and design in maintainability, upgradability of the product. So that's all good. In Zyga, we don't take such a blunt view because we don't design interfaces for everything. We design interfaces for very specific products, for very specific business purposes, where we're convinced that they will delight our customers. I think upgrading, servicing luminaires is something which will delight our customers in many cases. And that's what we're focusing on. So we don't have this broad, covering it all, generic view about upgradability. We have this in very precise, defined instances. Looking at book 18, where we define the interface between an outdoor luminaire and a smart sensor, makes it really easy to plug and play, add this sensor to the luminaire. Just wonderful. And it's an outgrowth of this idea of replacing things. And it has lots of additional advantages. So I think the big challenge is to identify these business opportunities and zoom in on them first. I think that's what the lighting industry needs to do. Mm-hmm. Then standards will play a role there, because indeed, when you talk about this, scaling it up, spare part management, standards have a role to play. Not always, not everywhere, but in specific, well-selected instances. And that's what we try to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a role for new standards, new books, as you term them, for when you get user replaceability? Do you see new types of connections coming along?
Yep. I mentioned our book 18, which is then typically non-lamp. So here we want to talk about the return of the lamp. We also have a new standard in the making, which enables the exchange of linear LED modules, really classical linear LED modules as we have them everywhere in the industry. But then we added a connector and make them plug and play replaceable. And that is also something I think the industry can benefit from and look at. And then we have then the scale to make this a mass product, make it available cheap and efficiently. We have the expertise. We have a lot of connector manufacturers in our community that have the expertise to design these connectors so that they are material really, really efficient, because that's also a real skill and art. And I think these two combine then and will help the industry forward. Mm. And as I said, there's a number of examples in the making. Book 18 is one thing. The other books about replaceability of linear modules is another one. I think this is a wonderful idea for the industry, and which will enable a little bit different design of luminaires, but also enable service markets to flourish where they now have problems with sealed for life luminaires that don't have any servicing options at all.
Mm-hmm. I just meant to say, guys, if you want to get in, just interrupt or raise your hand physically or electronically, so to speak.
But don't contradict us.
Don't contradict anybody. That's the main thing. Tell me this though: do manufacturers want interoperability? Really?
In markets where it makes sense, yes. It's the purpose of Zaga to have interoperability between products from different vendors. Where this makes sense, I said, I don't think we should have these questions in this great generic generality. And we should zoom in and then ask ourselves, does this make sense in this case? Do our customers want this? And maybe as a manufacturer, I would love to live in my own monopoly, but my customers don't want this. And that's where also the manufacturers in Zaga are keenly aware of that in order to develop the business, they need to offer standards to their customers, because these don't want these monopolies.
Yeah,
and again, sorry.
Yeah, I think what we're also going to see there, Dee, is that when we look at the specifier market, where perhaps, if we're looking at commercial buildings and the world of architecture and specification, so let's kind of move into one of these categories I was talking about as a for instance. I suspect you're going to find that the specifiers will be looking at the luminaires, and they will be doing life cycle costs on behalf of their clients, and they will be looking at the potential for repairability as a precursor to actually specifying the luminaire in a tender document in the first place.
Yeah, they're all looking for tools to be more flexible, and additionally, as a bonus, greener. And I've heard this from many specifiers, and they're looking for this, but they lack the tools. So we need to develop these tools as an industry to serve the customers, to serve their needs.
I mean, customers may want, if they've got a Zumtobel luminaire, they may want to put in another manufacturer's light source down the road, but that's not something that you would welcome at Zumtobel, surely.
Well, it doesn't make good business sense to Zumtobel for that to happen, but what it does, it opens up the market for manufacturer endorsed spares, for instance, and that doesn't stop another manufacturer making a replacement, but gaining, the authority or the blessing of the source manufacturer. Again, I think it's going to be down to market forces. And I think there's another dimension we have to think about as well, is that part of the circular economy is also future-proofing your product to a certain point. So it's not just about repairability and replaceability, it's also about upgradability to a certain extent. So you have to marry that with the progress of technology. So if I sold you a luminaire today that was cutting edge, in 5 or 10 years' time, it might not be cutting edge, or it might not be flavor of the month in terms of architectural style. But I may have built into that the ability and some spare physical space to upgrade the driver or the LED board from an energy perspective, maybe from a spectral light output perspective. And it may be that, when the product comes to be refurbished, there are other companies that want to do this as well. But in doing so, they will also have to take over the certification of the product. Pretty much now, like when a luminaire has an emergency conversion, an internal conversion, you really need a company that's ISEL accredited and working to that code of practice, because they take over this UK CA marking for the luminaire. They essentially take that on and are liable for it because they've modified it. And I think the same would apply to anybody else providing equivalent parts going into a luminaire that didn't come from the source manufacturer. So that again opens up another big area for debate.
Phil, you were nodding there. Is that how you see things developing?
It is, yeah, and it's a very pertinent point that with the UKCA or with CE marking, as soon as you alter the actual inside of the product electrically or whoever else, the CE mark becomes void. So whoever is making a change to that product is then going to have to be able to ensure that the product is CE compliant. So they are recertifying the product themselves. They become the manufacturer essentially. So unless it is an approved aftermarket, spare part that has been tested in the product, then all the CE certification or UKCE or ENEC becomes totally void. So, there's a safety issue, there's a performance issue, and we are not against, people doing that in products as long as it has been fully, CE marked again. and the labeling has been changed. You know, the other thing, I guess, you know, we were talking about is, you know, standardized interfaces. You know, we talk about, you know, technology being upgradable. You know, 30, you know, years ago when I started, you know, we designed products and they were good for, you know, 10 years. You never had to re-engineer a product because the technology didn't change quickly enough. You know, the biggest change was probably wire wound gear to electronic, but other than that, the products didn't change. But, you know, now products are obsolete within a couple of years. So, you know, we have products out in the marketplace. We have a huge installed base of products that, you know, some of them we've upgraded 4 times. So they started, you know, 20, 30 plus years ago as T12 fittings, and they're now on to their 2nd generation of LED. But it's a plug and socket connector. So to us, it's a standardized interface, and there is no.
Yeah. So just,
know the product CE marked.
Well, again, Phil, we've both fallen into the trap, speaking perhaps about higher end specification grade products here as our example. So if we go back to the idea of segregating the luminaire market, if we take this argument right back to, say, domestic, then if you had some downlighters or perhaps a circular enclosed in your hallway or entrance lobby to your home, and it went faulty after, say, 5-10 years, you would fully expect to be able to open that luminaire and do some work on it to keep it going, rather than having to scrap it and replace it, as we probably would have to do now. So this, I think this is why it's important to have these categories of luminaire type by market type, and then look at the arguments and the pros and cons for each one, because we've just jumped straight into sort of consultancy, architectural specification grade, and we forgot the domestic end straight away in our argument there.
Yeah, no, and you're quite right. But again, if you're taking it to the letter, and, you know, we're looking, you know, if we have a, you know, a replaceable domestic LED lamp, you know, has integral, you know, an integral driver, you know, are we saying that the actual light source and the driver part of that lamp has now to be, you know, you can actually separate it and you actually dispose of the complete lamp. You actually, you know, you change the driver or the light source for that matter. So you have yet another interface that has to be foolproof. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't without its complications. But yeah, I think dividing it into some kind of categorization would make sense, because it means different things to different markets.
Jeff, I was going to bring you in here anyway, because I think you're where the rubber meets the road, really, as to when, you know, changing, replacing light sources in the real world. So.
Sure. I mean, I was listening to Phil, and he's right. You know, if you've got a fixture at home, like I've got one right behind me here, just with an LED lamp, and if I take that out, fine, I'll put a new LED lamp. And if that's a drive or a piece of control gear, I can't change a socket in my house unless I'm Part P qualified or an electrician. So why does that mean I can change the control gear in that fixture if I can't change the socket? And how does that affect my insurance and everything else that goes with it? So there's that piece from a home piece. What is a competent DIYer, for want of a better word, and what isn't? But yeah, in terms of in the wider retail world that we serve, they all want, and I would agree with Dee entirely, they all want sustainability. They want products that can be easily repaired, that give 15-20 years life, which is something you mentioned at the very start, right? As a circular piece to it, and I really like that. And I know that there's a lot of retailers out there that want that, but they want the latest stuff. So I also agree with Sophie as well, that they want the latest controls, and so a fixture that comes with everything that comes with now that can be replaced, but has the ability to be developed and move forward as technology increases. I think it's a fantastic idea. That's exactly what we need. But the components piece, which I think Phil also alluded to as well, yeah, there's so much out there that we can replace. But he's right. You know, as soon as we replace it with somebody else's control gear, the warranty on that product is out the window. So, but we get what we need. So is there not a piece for maybe the manufacturers to say, as long as you're using these particular manufacturers and you're fitting it in a certain way, then that's acceptable, so we can do that. So I think that's sort of maybe where we need to get to in a few years' time, is that if we're going to work on these products together, then we have to work together and understand exactly what we're all happy to do, and probably park a few of our commercial pieces to one side. Me as well, because at the end of the day, I'd love our guys to be out there changing lights every day. That'd be fantastic. But the reality is, when you look at the cost of attending a store to change a couple of lamps, it doesn't work for the client, and it doesn't work for us, because the lamps are a few quid and the cost to attend is a lot more than a few quid. So it we do need to think about that piece and actually get to this point where we can actually replace, retrofit, upgrade, and I think that'd be a great idea.
And Jeff, wasn't there an issue in retail where, you know, with lead tubes, when lead tubes first came in the market, in terms of compatibility, you're going in there and you're changing them, and it's all different.
Yeah, so you know, there was back in the day, you know, there was the switch start solution and there was the high frequency control gear solution. So if you had a store that had been partially refurbed, it might have switch start in one piece, high frequency in another, and that involved having to take two separate tubes. The switch starts were fairly simple because they had a little starter canister. You replace the starter switch with a canister. That was great. On the high frequency side, you probably had to rewire the whole fixture and disconnect control gear from the lamp holders. And that was the only way to do it. But then you couldn't do, as I think was alluded to earlier, the emergency, because those tubes didn't work on the emergency circuits. If it had Dali dimming capability or some dimming capability, it didn't work on that either. So you ended up in some stores with one or two fixtures never being replaced, but everything else was.
And also, wasn't there an issue that, you know, one end of a lead tube would go live in certain fittings and not in others, and the different brands? And,
yes,
you know, you don't want to be up a ladder when that happens, do you?
Yeah, I mean, you had to have, initially going back a few generations, you had live to one and neutral to another. So if you happen to have that tube still plugged into the one end that was live and you happen to press the pins on this side, you got a bell. So that's when they changed the standard to be live and neutral to one end. So if you had this end, it was dead. But if you pulled that end out, obviously there was nothing connected to it, so you were safe. But those sort of issues came around, and obviously a lot of that stuff came in imported from, you know, Asia, and it was very cheap. It was of poor performance. It didn't last, and you know, it's probably already been replaced.
Peter, this doesn't augur well for this coming replacement market if we've had these problems and we haven't even got going.
Oh, you're right, Ray. But of course, I guess what happened in that particular instance is that the products weren't designed originally to have LED tubes retrofitted to a fluorescent. So I think what this regulation is trying to do, and what manufacturers are trying to do, is to design their luminaires for upgradability and design for the future and make them future-proof, which of course brings in things like interfaces from Zaga and so
on. Yeah, I think it's just the legacy, you know, if we look at Gen 1 LED, when LED first arrived, as to where we're going to go now, and it's really going to apply to products going forward from this year. There's an awful big legacy out there. There's still a storm behind us, isn't there?
Yeah. What do we do with all that old stuff, basically? All the legacy historical stuff that's still out there. That's not the stuff that's made out of girders, like Phil's, that's going to last for 20 years, but the other cheaper stuff, shall we say. What are we going to do with all that? Because if we can find an LED product that's universal to a point that will fit all of those older fixtures, wouldn't that be fantastic? Because we could stop all this silliness about, you know, changing fluorescent lamps every year. And I don't know how many fluorescent lamps have been sold in the last year or two, but I bet it's still significantly more than we think it is.
There's still a lot out there.
Yeah, and why are we doing that?
Nigel, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I was going to say, I really liked Sophie's idea of categorizing different types of fitting and then coming up with industry-led guidance on best practice on this, perhaps if Peter is the auspices of the LIA, because although it's the courts that ultimately decide how the law should be interpreted, actually good industry guidance makes a lot of sense. It gives a good defense for manufacturers, and actually courts will take that into consideration as well. So I think there's a lot to be said for coming up with something that actually is at least a common hymn sheet that the industry is singing to.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, really, because whilst I agree that certainly the LIA would be very keen, I think, to issue best practice and some guidance to manufacturers. If we go back to that in-ground downlighter, for example, and let's say if we were to categorize all in-ground downlighters, sorry, uplighters. How can you have an in-ground downlighter?
It's a new category.
Yeah, so efficient.
Innovation's always happening.
Okay. So yeah, if we were to say that best practice is that they are always considered to be a non-replaceable, non-removable product, then another manufacturer comes up with, a brainwave and comes up with a very clever system for a maintainable in-ground uplighter. What do we do at that point? We've had this in the past where we've been talking to government about what is acceptable efficacy for a product, and then a manufacturer will come up and say, well, I've got something that's 50% more efficient than that. It creates a problem, and of course what we don't want to do is stifle the market. If innovation is going to give us in-ground uplighters that have replaceable components and that are safe, then what's the problem with that?
Yeah, and we're talking about now, but we don't know what's a few years down the road, which may take us in that direction. And again, from a specification point of view, it would be the way to go, wouldn't it? Because time and technology have moved on. We're talking about the present.
Yeah. And it's also looking into these problems and then solving that. So we haven't looked at our products with these eyes of replaceability for a long time, because we thought that maybe integration was not a way to go. But if you look at the problems, then you can just analyze them and try to solve them and see where you make progress. And I think there's a lot of examples where now it's not feasible, but with some concerted effort, some R&D, it will be perfectly feasible to do this. And then also to design the interfaces in a way that goes well with the application, where sometimes you would like every idiot to be able to exchange the component, where sometimes you wouldn't want to. And so, but it is indeed getting the focus, the awareness, and solving the problems in a lot of cases.
Dee, what sort of, how much interoperability do you think there will be in the market? Will there be a lot like the old days of the lamps, or will there be, will every manufacturer want to have its walled garden?
Let me be clear. So for me, lamps is a metaphor for that sure. We are able to maintain, upgrade our products. Exactly where we will zoom into is dependent on where it makes sense and where it does indeed create this added value for the customers, for the industry. And so in that sense, I don't think it's going to be like the old world of the lamps, because these LED modules, they are not typically the components that would fail early on. Zooming in on drivers may be something that interests the market more, because drivers are also reliable product, definitely from the reputable companies, but they are more prone to fail than the LED modules. So maybe zooming in on drivers is something that is important. And I heard Jeff say how difficult this is, and that's because it's not designed for that. So maybe there's something the industry could do. Again, not generically, but maybe look at downlighters first, or look at auto luminaires first, where we see the biggest need, as well as opportunities. We can also think about the intelligence. So in Zaga, I said we're very keen on making sensors and communication nodes replaceable, because we think that's an area where there's a definite need, because the innovation speed in these areas is still so rapid that if you design in a sensor for never being able to replace it, your luminaire is going to be outdated in a couple of years, and that's why you don't want to do that, and that's also, I think, why these programs are so successful there, and so it is as in the old days, but not as in the old days, I would then like to say, and maybe this raises again more questions than it answers, but I hope you get my point. Mm-hmm. We will focus on maintainability, durability, but we have to identify exactly where it is. And it might very well be not the lamps generically, not the light sources even, although we as a light industry, we love our light sources, and that's always our primary focus. But it may be on intelligence, maybe on connectivity, and maybe on drivers, if we look at a topic which is again a bit more tangible maybe. So yes, as in the old days, but not as in the old days.
But Dee, isn't it the case that, you know, customers want, you know, cheap interchangeability, and that's what customers want. But there's a conflict between customers and the industry, because the lighting industry doesn't want cheap commoditized, because once you standardize it'll become commoditized, and with all the problems we've had with commoditization.
Yeah, it's really cool you bring in the cheap. Sorry for interrupting you, Ray, because this makes me really emotional.
No. Good to see passion.
Because it's broad and different ways. Sometimes they say, hey, we don't need these interfaces because it makes it so expensive. Now all of a sudden it makes it so cheap, so you can always look at the things from two angles. I don't think that customers seek cheap per se. I think customers want value for their money, and that is something that has to be explained to them sometimes. And I know, of course, some would prefer to buy a lamp that lasts a year because it's a bit cheaper compared to a lamp that lasts 10 years. And that's where you need market education and maybe help the market to move to overgo. But I don't think, again, generically customers want cheap. Customers want value for the money, things that last, and their mindset in these things are also changing. They want to shy away from things the throwaway items, the things that will be there for a few months, years. So it's also shaping the mindset of the customer in this respect. I think also there the regulation, the Green Deal, Europe is doing a good way, saying, hey, this is necessary for our planet. And then I think the customers will start understanding that and take that over and look at it differently from the monetary expenses at the moment of buying something, at the moment of sale, but look more at the monetary expenses over a lifetime of a product. And there we have a much better position. Yeah.
Okay, now taking some comments and questions from the audience. Simon Fisher is saying he's been doing research with his clients, and the attitude there is, why would I spend, you know, $8 buying replacements and then the man hours replacing the parts when he can spend $10 and go on a completely new fixture? This is it. This is going to be an issue about cost, isn't it? Yeah,
I think so. You know, and I think there's going to be an incentive for people to do it. So, you know, as I think I said at the start, you know, you can incentivize people financially. That's generally a good way to do it. So, you know, do we drop the VAT on replacement parts? You know, and we know that a lot of manufacturers make a very tidy profit on spare parts as well. But then, you know, something's got to come along behind it. You know, that you know, legislation. But I think it's always good to start with a carrot and then follow it up with a stick further down the line.
Is my printer ink analogy a bit a step too far?
I don't think it is, but I mean, I guess with printer ink, you know, even with our aftermarket printer inks, you know, you have our, you know, guaranteed compatibility. You can't certainly guarantee the performance. But going back to, you know, sort of what Dee was talking about with you know, interfaces, you know, the big worry is, you know, is electrical and electronic compatibility. You know, inevitably the driver is the part in most cases that will fail. You know, the light source, if it's run correctly, will be fine for much longer. And you know, and in a domestic situation, certainly it's tricky to guarantee somebody making that compatible upgrade. But it's similarly the same in the professional market. I'm just not sure how in reality it works. You know, and I guess as Matt, you know, let's not forget that lighting's a visual thing. You know, lighting is for practical purposes, but you know, it's a visual thing as well. It's, you know, it should thrill people and make fantastic spaces. And I think what always worries, you know, people in lighting or creators would, you know, sort of worry that, you know, standardization is going to stifle some kind of creativity, and you end up with lighting vanilla. You know, it's going to be difficult to see how you balance the two.
Phil, if you package your luminaire with a Tridonic driver, and then 3 years down the road, somebody puts in an Osram, or you guys put in an Osram driver because it's more efficient and it's better and it's all the rest of it.
Yep.
Isn't there a need to let's nail this? Do we need to have new testing, new certification?
Yes.
ENEC test.
Yep.
All of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, it would have to be RE-C certified. So we would carry out all the testing, and anyone would have to do that. And if it's, you know, if it's ENEC approved, the same would have to happen there. It's a change to the product. So, you know, upgradability, you know, it's not as simple as you might think. But, you know, we're prepared to do it. And, you know, I guess other reputable manufacturers would do the same. But yeah, you have to retest.
But you, Jeff, you can't do that up a ladder in a Mulberry store, can you?
No, but that goes back to what you guys were saying at the start, which is that you have a range of products that are already pre-agreed that, you know, say if it's a Phil's luminaire or Sophie's luminaire, that, and also to answer Simon's question, in reality, yes, if something's only $8 and the fitting's $10, but if you can fit something that maybe is $8 that will do more than what the fixture originally was intended for, it might have some controls which have been talked about, or some better functionality out of it, or it's got better light output, or it's got sensors and bits and pieces on it, then surely that's the way forward, because you've got other benefits to it as well. But no, you cannot test that up a ladder. You can test its electrical, it's working correctly, you can test the luminaire itself, but you can't do a CE test on the luminaire or an ENEC test. You were just testing that it's electrically safe and sound, and that you've done the right work to make that fixture safe. But you're right, the warranty's with us then, effectively, because we've done that work.
Jeff, how would you feel if, you know, you used the analogy of an $8 or an £8 luminaire, and then you talked about additional benefits and features. How would you feel if that £8 suddenly became 10 or even £12 to give those additional features? Would you be prepared to pay a bit more to get that functionality?
I think there is a market for that. Yes, definitely. We've looked with a number of our retail customers at making lighting more intelligent and making their stores more intelligent, and integrating lots of services into one system that does everything. So it does power supply, it does LED, it does point of sale, it does battery backup, it does, you know, PV on the roof, security, fire, everything. And there are people out there who genuinely are looking at that. They don't understand it all yet, because at the minute they're only just starting to trade again, so they need time to sort of fill the coffers again and to move forward. But there are retailers out there spending money on new lighting and trying to understand what else they can add to that. And I think there is a market for sensible, smart lighting, for want of a better word. But some of the stuff we've seen over the last few years as it first came out, it just didn't stack up in terms of the cost against, you know, it might have been 200 quid for a luminaire instead of 100. And when they looked at that, there was just no way that they could see why they would want to spend that sort of money, what the benefits and paybacks would be. But by making things more interactive and making them not interactive, but interchangeable, and that they can see that they can upgrade that product in 5 years and not get rid of it, well surely that's, I can't imagine that maybe at the sort of lower end of retail, no offense meant to them, where they just want to have a blanket light and that's it. Maybe they won't be that interested in that.
Back to market categories, you're absolutely right. But you know, it could cost more. And we have a similar analogy at the moment in the world of emergency lighting. So, you know, there are benefits sometimes from going from self-contained emergency lighting to central battery systems, for instance. The capital cost is a little bit more, but the cost of ownership to the end user, say over 10 or 15 years, is a lot lower than, you know, where you just replace one set of batteries every 10 years in one common point, as opposed to lots of little batteries up a step ladder, out of hours, at each luminaire every 4 to 5 years at present.
And the 3-hour test every year, Sophie. So
yeah,
the cost of having to do that out of hours.
Do you invest in automatic testing and reporting, or do you want to do it manually with a clipboard and a fish switch and send somebody around out of hours as well? So it depends. What my experience of that is it depends on the specification side, how strong the end user is in saying, what about the, you know, the cost benefit over the life cycle of what I'm buying here. And if that argument is not solid and sound from the side of the desk of the end user or the facilities manager, then usually the contractor who's concerned with prime cost will go for the path of least resistance and put the cheapest thing in possible to appear to be meeting the specification on the day at the point of handover, with no concern for the cost of ownership for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I think as we go into the circular economy and we raise this state of awareness, you know, in general, then I'm hoping that clients will start to look more closely, or their specifiers will look at it for them and brief them so they can make fully informed decisions, because that very rarely happens at the moment.
I would agree with you. It's all about education safety at the end of the day, isn't it? Always has been, and it always will be. But let's say, taking on board all the things that say Dee said about all the different stuff that's coming in, all you guys have said as well, it's changed so much. If I look at what I started looking at from smart 3 years ago to what I'm looking at now, it's a million miles apart from what I was thinking about.
Yeah, there is a difference between smart buildings and smart ass buildings.
You are correct. Yeah.
Okay, Kelvin Thomas is asking, where a cabinet maker integrates a luminaire into an item of furniture, for example, a kitchen cabinet using aluminium extrusion and lead tape, and the extrusion is bonded in and the cable is not accessible, is the whole kitchen unit now a luminaire? I suppose it is. Peter, would you say?
Well, according to that regulation, yes, it is. If by trying to remove the light source you damage it, or by trying to remove the control gear you damage it, then it has to technically be a luminaire.
A containing product is the word, then, huh? That's why they selected the word like they did.
And market surveillance authorities need to get into that kitchen unit, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, good luck with that. Jerry Knowles is saying integrated luminaires that are currently available but will be outlawed in September are simply innovations of legacy products. Examples being the 2D bulkhead is just a 2D bulkhead with an integrated light source, as is a corrosion-proof luminaire as a floodlight. So you simply have to go back to how it was, i.e. a 2D luminaire will have a driver and a GRB cap. A corrosion-proof luminaire will come as a fixture with a G5 or G13 cap. And a floodlight will have an R7S cap. Their replacement light sources are already available for more than one manufacturer and have been replaced by consumers. Are we not making a big deal out of something that has a ready-made solution already in situ? Anyone?
I hear some of that, and yeah, there are some really good quality LED tubes and lamps out there. But there's also some that aren't that good. Like for the RX7S ones, the ones that I've seen, we don't use them, and we don't use them for a reason, because they're not powerful enough. They're great for energy saving, but the actual light output, in my opinion, is poor. So like a ceramic lamp, the G12 or a G8.5 ceramic lamp, there aren't any LED versions of those out there, or there are, but they're nowhere near the light output and light quality of a ceramic magneto lamp. That's why they're not out there. Or if they are, they're from usually cheaper imports. But Joe makes a good point. There are some really good lamps out there that do exactly what they say on the tin. And yes, you could carry on using those lamps in those fittings that he's mentioned. So I'll take his point. Yes, you could do that entirely. But what element of changes do you have to make to that fitting? Then if it's a high frequency or an old switch start one or whatever, you still got to do some element of possible changing, or just change the start switch.
Yeah, to be careful of falling into the trap of, designing around old, formats. So I'm not sure whether you're talking about upgrading existing products or whether we're actually talking about designing, new products with LED technology around old lamp technology. I mean, they work in a very different way. The lit effect is totally different. The directionality of it is different. So, I think part of it is true. I think we need to actually go right back to the beginning and think about how we design and develop products. But we've got to design it around the right technology, not around old legacy stuff, because it doesn't work.
Tom Riddell is saying, should we be concerned about manufacturers taking a razor blade model, locking in and overcharging the customer for replacements? How can we prevent this? That's pretty for you, Jeff. I mean, how do you can see a situation where it's not going to be worth replacing. You say to your retail, your hard pushed retail clients, oh, it's going to cost 150 quid to upgrade that and replace it, and they're going to say, well, I'd rather get new luminaires.
So if it's a one-off, you're entirely right. Yeah, it would probably be pointless when you take the labour to attend and do it. But that's when this whole plan about replacing things against a cycle and maybe doing a whole store or a section of a store, or the the cabinet manufacturer piece, so the millwork that comes with all the lighting already built into it.
Yeah.
So that all has to be taken apart to take out all the existing, say, old T5, T8 linkable light fittings that are no longer made in a lot of cases. and then trying to retrofit that with LED lamps, which doesn't work because obviously the rewiring necessary and so on. So actually from that point of view, yeah, there's no point putting those T5 and T8 LED lamps into the existing because they're very often aged. They have very small bodies, so the control gear within them very often hits heat damaged, it goes brittle, it fails regularly. And actually, in that instance, it's easier just to take it out, put the LED in. But taking on board this piece about what we put in, if we put something in that has an element of development in it, and improvement and upgrade in it, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Because we could sell not only the benefit of that, but also that we can do other things to that fixture in the next 5-10 years.
So there's a big difference between a spot replacement and taking luminaires out of a store, taking them off, reworking them, putting them back, testing them, and putting them back. That's probably how you see it working, rather than like the old days of a lamp guy up a ladder with a lamp change. Yeah,
it'd have to be against a program, right? It should be as well, shouldn't it? If we've educated the customer correctly and they want to do something different, then they'll be doing a program of works, whether it be they can't do the whole store, but it's half the store or a floor or whatever it might be, or a number of stores. That's the way to do it. You can't just look at it from one light fixture, one attendance fee. That'll never work. And anyway, there's the whole thing that the LED luminaires don't get changed because the light output has dropped. That doesn't really happen in the real world, does it? I mean, how many people actually know what those figures are? Like if I say to somebody it's L70B10, they wouldn't have a clue what I'm talking about, to be frank. But why are they bothered if the store's lit and they're happy with the illumination? But it goes back to what Dee said, it's all about the drivers and control gear. That's the things that go wrong. So they're the things that we replace constantly within LED fixtures within stores now. We constantly are changing drivers. So we need, we use the better quality drivers as well, as you would expect us to. But, we need to have other sort of like innovations in the drivers and the controls and what we can add to that. So when we change that driver, could we actually do something else to that fixture that gives it even more value? Yes, and then you can justify the cost, yeah. Kevin Shaw is asking, I think that the eco-design requirement for removable light sources is being spun as replaceable light sources. This looks like a new version of greenwashing to develop a pseudo market in unnecessary replacement light sources. Peter, I'd say that's one for you. Is it replaceable or removable? This is a pretty fundamental element.
I think Europe guidance is very clear about this, and I think the regulation is the difference between replaceable and removable. The removable really refers to when market surveillance authorities need to be able to remove it for verification purposes. That's not necessarily replaceable. Replaceable is where either an end user or a qualifying person can simply take the old component out and plug a new component in.
So the market surveillance authorities can damage the product. That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they don't damage what they're testing, they can damage the product.
They're allowed. Okay. All right. That's a fun job. Yeah. Piers Campbell is asking, is replacing and resoldering an LED chip into a downlight, is that replaceable? Is that a commonly available tool? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll do that one. I mean, for a start, an LED chip isn't actually a light source, so the regulation doesn't go down to that level. But if you say resolder an LED module, then soldering iron is a commonly available tool. You can get that anywhere. And I would say if that's done by a qualified person who's qualified to operate the soldering iron or trained to do so, then yeah, that's a commonly available tool.
Okay. Remold Whatkoviak is asking, in my understanding, LED modules placed on the market are not considered EEE or waste electrical equipment. Consequently, collection of end-of-life replaced LED modules will not contribute to collection target achieved. With the repairability, replaceability aspects in mind, what is the current thinking around how to tackle this process end-to-end, and who should finance the collection of end-of-life LED modules that are, I presume, are removed from luminaire? Nigel?
Yes, I think that the issue is that there are different national interpretations of the WEEE directive in different countries. And even though the UK has exited now, and obviously that our regulations are freestanding, at the moment they're still very largely based on the WEEE directive. And in some countries, a replaceable LED module might not be regarded as needing to comply with the WEEE regulations. In the UK, they are required. So where you are selling an LED module for upgrade or replacement purposes to an end user, that should be declared under the WEEE regulations, and therefore it would be financing and contributing to its collection and recycling, as he suggests. But it's not consistent across all countries.
Okay, okay. And Romuald is in Poland, so I don't know what the situation is there. Matt Frey writes, product design has a big part to play. We haven't really touched on this, have we, in creativity, etc. All luminaires need a light source and something to drive that light source. We should be able to make those components replaceable, upgradable, but only at the end of life. We should be utilizing smart technology to determine end of life. Interesting. Sophie, creativity, is that going to, you know, this requirement, is that going to change luminaire design, make life difficult for your 18,000 products that you guys have?
Yeah, again, it comes down to categorization of products. So some products, you know, if you look at high-end architecture, quite often the architect will design a luminaire that doesn't exist and has to be constructed for that project. So there is a lot of bespoke and ultra special work goes on into certain sectors of the market. And again, as a designer of those luminaires, it's what products or subcomponents you choose to build that product that architect or designer has specified, for instance. So you'll need to have a different view of when you're designing a luminaire as to how you're going to create that, and also satisfy legislation as far as possible, because that luminaire could go wrong. It could need refurbishing in 5 or 6 years' time. You know, the analogy at the moment with high-end lighting that I see is some of the luminaires I speak to customers about maybe are 15 years old and based on fluorescent, and invariably something goes wrong with the driver or the fluorescent, and they want to, and the luminaire is in an environment where it looks as good as the day it was installed, if I'm honest, but the technology within the luminaire is very old and there's not a lot you can do with it. It's based on fluorescent. And the problem comes when you say, yeah, you could replace it with a physically equivalent sized LED luminaire, but then everything else in the room or the space would look odd. So it's, how do you deal with a single point of failure vis-a-vis the overall lit effect and the creativity and design that was there originally? So these are all the sorts of real world questions and challenges I see on an almost daily basis, to be honest. But yeah, I think there's no excuse. If an architect came along and said, I want a linear luminaire that squiggles and ducks and weaves and looks like a map of a racing car circuit or a plate of spaghetti, because that's the artistic intent I want in my reception, then yes, you can build it, but you would, as a manufacturer, you would have to strive to build it with as many standard components inside as possible that could be replaced if something went wrong. And then that in itself would become a selling point for that luminaire, because the client's probably wondering what they're getting into.
But I mean, yeah, because you guys have some really incredible slim luminaires where the LEDs are integrated into the optic, and they're very beautiful. But I don't know how you would begin to extract the light source from those luminaires. Well,
yeah, I think, Nigel, you would, I'm sure there's a project that Ricoh Light are involved in. It has been very difficult to extract, say, the gallium that makes up the actual LED chip. It is a rare earth metal. It does have a value. It's used in other industries as well, not just lighting. But it's how do you extract it and make it commercially viable as part of the WEEE process. But I believe there's a pilot project on the go at the moment which is looking at extraction technology for this, Nigel.
There is indeed. It'll be probably at least another 6 months before we get any output of it. What we've been doing at the moment is grinding up LED modules, or one of the project partners has been, and looking at ways in which we could extract the gallium. Clearly, there's a long way from a research project to something that actually is commercially workable and is able to compete with gallium sourced as an original element, but let's wait and see whether it's successful or not.
Yeah.
Clear though is that there doesn't seem to be huge quantities of gallium in the LED chips, certainly that we've looked at so far. and so getting it out is quite challenging.
Yeah, but going back to your original question, Ray, it is going to be a design challenge to create these wonderfully creative luminaires that also comply with the the overall customer expectation under recycling and circular economy. But I believe that we can do that. What we don't want to go back to is the days where we were using internationally standardized lamps of a certain size and length and form, because that was actually restricting creativity towards the end. Quite often an architect would say, I want, and they have this wonderful vision. And it's like, that's not possible to create, because we are actually governed to a degree by lamp sizes that are available. With LED, it can be a lot more creative and flexible, but there still has to be ground rules by, in what you do in terms of meeting the legislation surrounding those products. I don't think it's an excuse to run away and ignore them.
So you wouldn't use a technical justification to opt out for those particular products?
You'd have to look at it on a product by product basis. There may be some degree, and again, a technical justification is not a yes/no document. There may be degrees of justification, and it may be you can replace the driver, but maybe you can't get at the LED source without replacing the louver, which the LEDs are embodied in, for instance. You may not get down to the precise component level that you think you can if you've had an experience of doing some replacement on your downlighter at home, for instance, over the weekend, and you come in with that analogy in your head into work on a Monday morning to have this conversation at this level.
Yeah, correct. It's not like that at all, is it? A couple of comments. Lawrence Barling says, of the LIA, says, replaceability means many things. Replacing a driver because of an early failure is one aspect. Replacing to upgrade, add features, etc., is totally different. That's who you're talking about, Jeff. They need to be considered differently. I think that's coming clear that we need to. Kevin Shaw is saying there's a degree of consensus that gear failure is the significant problem. Should we be focusing on gear replaceability like the old switch starter rather than the light source replacement? And yeah, yeah, I'm sure gear companies wouldn't be too happy about that, but we leave that as it may. Nigel, how do we stop, luminaires that don't have replaceability, don't have technical documents, don't have a technical justification coming into the market, this autumn on online marketplaces and all the rest of it? Who polices that? And because the experience hasn't been good over the last few years, has it?
It is really tough, and compliant manufacturers have always suffered at the hands of organisations that are willing to sell products that are frankly illegal. And it's not just the WEEE regulations; it's safety, it's ROS, it's REACH. The LIA did some testing of half a dozen products bought from an online marketplace and half a dozen bought from traditional retailers, and unsurprisingly 5 out of the 6, I think you at the time, Peter, from an online marketplace failed in a safety critical manner or had safety critical related failures. Those all bought from traditional retailers all passed. And so we do have a real problem of non-compliance through online marketplaces. I think the government has taken this on board now and is starting to come up with solutions to this, but it's on an individual set of legislation by legislation approach rather than an overarching way of trying to tackle non-compliance of all different legal requirements through online marketplaces. So unfortunately, it's true to say that probably it will be an issue in October and November this year and next year. And it is down to us, I think, as an industry to identify where we can that there are products that are not compliant and to do our best to report them. But it's in the short term, it's not something that's going to go away, sadly. I don't know, do you have anything to add to that, Peter?
Yes, well, of course, in Europe, the Digital Services Act is trying to address this problem, but in our opinion, it doesn't go anywhere near far enough because it doesn't place enough liability inside Europe, and it will be the same in the UK if we adopt a similar regulation. And so there is still a get out effectively. What it does is it places liability on the company that may be out of the legal jurisdiction of our market surveillance authorities. So if it's manufactured in China and CE marked there and shipped directly here, technically the Chinese company is responsible, but the reality is that they're not going to be called by the market surveillance authorities. They're probably not paying their WE compliance fees either. And it's a huge problem. I think that there's a move, obviously, by Europe and the UK governments to support a digital economy. And I have a feeling that behind this sort of, I suppose, lack of attention to this problem is this need to drive this digital economy. But ultimately, it does mean that unsafe products get on the market. It's a big concern. It's a drum we've been banging for a very long time, and we do our own market surveillance, as Nigel quite rightly said. But I'm afraid that the market surveillance authorities' budgets keep getting cut. They don't have the resources to be able to police this, and the flood of products that's coming in is quite astounding.
That's trading standards we're talking about, isn't it, Peter?
I mean, the responsible for energy-related products and labelling are the Office of Product Safety and Standards, what used to be the old National Measurement Office.
Okay, yes.
Which is a government organisation. Trading standards are about safety, but there are moves to sort of centralise the safety aspect of trading standards work to the OPSS, but that's happening quite slowly.
Okay, Sophie?
Just extending on that, Peter, this idea of this EPRL database and these digital passports for luminaires, for instance, do you think that that is a good idea, that it puts some of the power in the hands of the purchaser and the specifier to be able to look at the pedigree of what they're buying, and also the surveillance agencies to use this online database as well to perhaps look at products which have been registered but don't comply? So I'm a little bit confused. It sounds like an awful lot of administration work to get all of your products loaded into the EPRL database, but I can't see who's going to use it and what the real benefits are, because the crooks out there just won't go anywhere near it. They'll just remain part of the grey economy.
I'm afraid you're right. I mean, those companies that do upload the data to the EPRL database are most likely to be the compliant companies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The market surveillance authority is looking in the wrong place.
And just sticking with this, and it doesn't apply to luminaires, but I had a personal experience, and I tried to bring a private prosecution. I bought a toaster griller online about 2 years ago, and after about a year, just over a year actually, it failed in a dangerous way. Luckily, I've got good electrics in my house and everything just tripped out to keep me safe. But when I approached the company and showed them that the invoice or the receipt they sent me that said, if I had any problems, I could contact them for spares or advice or whatever, a year and 2 months down the line, they didn't want to know. And when I analysed it, they were basically importing and shifting boxes, and they had no technical support function whatsoever for after sales. Basically, if it failed within the warranty period, they would just exchange it for another and probably scrap the one you sent back. But beyond that, there was absolutely nothing they were prepared to do. And when I spoke to trading standards, they basically were toothless in the whole thing. They just didn't have the resources to go after them. But, in a lesser home, perhaps with older wiring, this could have been a fatal situation for somebody, which is why I flagged it.
Couldn't this be an opportunity where it puts more clear blue water between the low grade imports and the quality manufacturers? Phil, do you see that happening where the good the people that have got upgradability, if we rebrand replaceability as upgradability, you can get a better, more efficient, you can do more stuff, and that's just a different market to the sort of imports.
Yeah, so I mean, the cost ratio looks far more attractive when you get to the top end of the professional market. It's a long-term investment, and the sums add up to upgrade or to repair. You go down to the other end of the market. You're buying a little domestic luminaire or table lamp off Amazon, and what do you do if you can't upgrade it or repair it yourself? What do you do? Call an engineer out, take a day off work to wait for the engineer to come and, change your, upgrade your £5 table lamp. But the problem will always be that money talks. And, if you don't really care, if you think short term, you're not going to spend a lot of money, and you certainly won't be referring to the EPRIL database to check whether, whether the product actually has all the documentation. So I think this is a much easier sell at the, the upper end of the market, where people are, they know what they're buying, or they care about what they're buying. Yeah. I think, as as we've all, we've all talked about, it's the other end of the market that is always going to be the challenge. And market surveillance authorities just don't have the capacity to do this. That's where the worry is.
Dee, do you agree this will polarize the market between the good and the bad?
The good and the bad, that's polarity anyway. So yeah, I could imagine that very well, but yeah.
But you welcome this. You think this is good for customers and ultimately will be good for the industry?
Then you have to rephrase the question. I'm sorry, Ray.
Yeah, my point is that you. Sorry, my point is that you believe that these regulations are good for customers because customers want replaceability and upgradability, but it can also be good for the industry, that we have to think about the future. We have to think about products differently.
I think it will help us to serve our customers better. So it's good for industry. It will also help move the lighting industry possibly closer to service industry. So rather than shifting products there, but doing more of the maintenance to work on it, which is locally done. And I think that will also serve the industry. Indeed, different business models, more wealthy business models, closer contact to customers with our service propositions. I think it will really help. We'll also help our customers have better lighting, more sustainable lighting. So yeah, I think that is good. Indeed, the question is, how do we make the customers to want this, to understand this? Because I think they want it, but sometimes the needs are implicit. They're not fully aware of that. And we have to make sure that they do understand. And then secondly, indeed, how do we avoid the dark sides of the market and avoid that all sort of products with loads of implicit costs that don't come out, the $10 downlighters with all the cost to our planet. How do we avoid they come in with, and creating this unlevel playing field? There's two sides to that. I'm always on the carrot side. Delight our customers, make new propositions, make sure they want this. I think that is also the key thing here. That is also the key thing. But the second part definitely also needs attention. And I can see loads of digital possibilities created by the Digital Service Act, although it may not go as far as needed. But that opens up new avenues to look at this set of problems. Although that is not Zaga turf, I must say. So let me refrain from stating too much about it.
I came to you, Dee, because I wanted to end on an optimistic note. So, Jeff, finally to you, because do you see this as a welcome opportunity, or is it a challenge or an opportunity for you guys?
I think it's an opportunity, personally. I think there are so many of our customers talking about sustainability, signing up to different procurement initiatives that are global as well, because a lot of these businesses are global and they want to talk about it. They're trying to understand how they can put that sustainability practice into play against budgets at the minute that are under real pressure because of what's happened over the last 12, 13 months. But if we can show them the life cycle, as I think everybody's mentioned, of what we can do now and what we could do to that fixture across the next 5, 10 years and give them more benefits than they get now, and still show a cost of ownership and a life cycle piece that really works for them and how they want to do it, I think it's a fantastic opportunity.
But you would still welcome guidance, wouldn't you?
Yeah, as I said, there are so many different products out there, so many different manufacturers, so many different ways of doing things, so many, as Sophie said, there's smart arse and there's smart. I 100% agree with that. What is smart? It's does it have to be really smart or just a little bit smart? What does it look like, and how do we make it interchangeable, upgradable, and where do we go with it, and how do we standardize it? But obviously not take away the creative piece, which I totally agree with, because obviously we deal with high-end retail. They want creative, they want wow, they want brilliant, they want fantastic. They don't want something just out of a box.
And finally, I'll wrap up with you, Peter. You see this as in a positive light as well, that this will be something that the industry can use to delight customers, provide upgradability, provide the services we want to provide them, and separate us from the sort of low cost, non-compliant products.
I do, Ray. I see it as a business opportunity, and I think actually those companies that don't grab this as an opportunity will probably be the ones that won't survive. Ultimately, it's those that adopt this that will survive going forward. And this is the first step in the circular economy journey, and we've got to change. There's no doubt about that. This is lighting's first foray into circular economy, and it's not the last. So there's a lot more of this to come. And
just finally on guidance, do you expect guidance to emerge from the LRA or?
Well, we've already issued the guidance from Lighting Europe on this particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, we also now have a circular economy technical committee, and I will go back to them with the suggestion that was made earlier on about categories and guidance relating to particular types of luminaire. So we'll watch this space on that one. We'll see what comes out of that.
Okay, great. We're at 12:30, so I think we'll wrap up now. I'm absolutely certain that we haven't answered every question. There's a lot of answers that will only emerge when the market gets going, and the dynamics of the market and what customers will pay for, what manufacturers are willing to do, and that I'm sure that will emerge. But I was pleased today that there's an optimism that we can do good stuff with this. So it's not just about replaceability. We can emphasize upgradability, new features, and where customers are pleased and happy to pay for sustainability and for extra features and benefits. And if that's the place we're going, well, it's not a bad place to go, really. So I'll wrap up there. Thanks for all your comments and questions that have come in. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise and experience with us today. Peter, Nigel, Dee, Phil, Jeff, and Sophie. And thanks to Adrian and Suzanne behind the scenes for pulling all the levers and making it all work. Do check out the future webinars. Dive onto recolite.co.uk, follow the links, and you can check out the 3 upcoming webinars, register for them, see who's on the panel and all the rest of it, and get those in your diary. And no doubt this is a topic that we will revisit again, this whole replaceability and upgradability. So thank you all, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, guys, and thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ray, for your chairmanship as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Ray.
Bye now.
Bye.